East Asia. Having those examples out there too, that we can share experiences with and draw strength from is really valuable for us.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. I am the ambassador of Mexico to Singapore. I'm very glad to have you here. Very enlightful lecture, honest, straightforward. And moving to a contribution from both sides of the Pacific, how do you envision the role of the new future associate states members of the Pacific Alliance and the role that they will play in this new order between the two rims of the Pacific? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Is it Nathan?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. As you know, I was in Mexico about 10 days ago, and I saw President Peña, and also I met President-elect López Obrador. And Canada, our government in particular, has worked really hard to strengthen our partnership with Mexico. We share a continent, and we're very glad to be working so closely with you. And the Pacific Alliance is, Canada's sort of stepped up involvement in the Pacific Alliance is one example of that. We're very excited about the Pacific Alliance. I think, to go back to Tim's point, and the ambassador's point, this is a moment when it's easy to be worried that the forces of dissolution are stronger than the forces of building, and that the forces of unraveling are stronger than the forces of multilateralism, that protectionism is stronger than trade liberalization. The Pacific Alliance is one example that goes in the opposite direction. And Canada really is excited about, we have free trade agreements with all of the Pacific Alliance countries. We are also members with some of the Pacific Alliance countries, including Mexico in the TPP-11 and with Mexico in NAFTA. So we have very close trading relationships already. And I see the Pacific Alliance as a great opportunity to strengthen those trading relationships and bring in some of our partners from the other side of the Pacific too.
Thank you, Minister. Gentleman with the beard, 3 rows in from the back.
Thank you, Minister. Patrick Ripple, Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Thank you for your lecture. Listening to it, I couldn't help but to realize there's a couple of similarities between the Canadians and the Europeans, actually. You are both supporting and defending a rule-based international order, multilateralism per se, and you both have identified this region as one of your key partners. At the same time, both of you are being left out of some of the key forums, be it the East Asia Summit, the EDAMM+. So I would like to hear your Canadian perspective of how you can overcome this kind of disconnect between aspiration and reality, where you are somehow disconnected or bonded by certain limitations.
Well, that is another really good question. And when it comes to Europe, that's a real compliment. I think we feel very close to our European partners, particularly now that CETA, our free trade agreement with the EU, has entered into force. And in fact, during the negotiation of CETA, our chief negotiator and the EU chief negotiator got to a point where Mauro, the EU chief negotiator, said to Steve, ours, we're building such a close trading relationship, pretty soon you guys are actually going to be an EU member. And Steve said, okay, that's fine. Let's do everything but. So we feel very close to Europe, and that's a very good thing. On the East Asia Summit, look, there's an easy answer to that. I think Canada should be a member. And I would sort of point out a couple of things. One is we're a Pacific nation. We are very much at home in this part of the world. And I do think, as I said in my lecture, that there is a lot that Canada and the countries of Southeast Asia have in common right now. when it comes to the kind of trade and security architecture that we have a shared interest in building and renewing for the 21st century. So, my answer to your question is, we want in, and we think we have a positive and constructive role to play here. At the end of the day, of course, it's up to our partners in Southeast Asia to decide how much Canada they want. But I think we're a pretty great country to work with.
Sir. Mr. Andy Wong.
Thanks for remembering me, Dr. Tim Huxley. Thanks for your invitation as well for my first Fullerton Lecture. My name is Andy Wong. I'm a fresh graduate from the University of Hull in History and Politics. I'm scheduled to go back to York this September for my master's, again in politics and history as well. My question is a simple one. You mentioned several times in your speech and your dialogue that might does not make right. How do you then suggest, in your opinion, that the defense of the rules-based international order be conducted against countries that are seen to be going against the grain without credible might, both militarily, economically, or in terms of diplomatic heft backing it up? Where does the respect for individual national sovereignty and destiny lie in balance with defending the international rules-based order cherished by some nations? Because not every nation might agree on it, so where's the compromise in that?
That is another really good question. And I will offer three answers. The first is, I do think that if you are a country and Canada is such a country, that believes in the rules-based international order, you need to appreciate that at the end of the day, hard power is sometimes necessary to defend that order. And our government has, for example, decided over time to increase our defense spending by 70%. And we have stepped up our military presence around the world. Canada is leading one of the 4 NATO battle groups in the Baltic states and Poland, the Enhanced Forward Presence battle groups. Canada is leading the battle group in Latvia. That is a direct response to Russian aggression in Ukraine. And it's something that our Prime Minister announced in July. We will continue to be there until 2023. We're proud to be there. That's important. Canada is present militarily in Ukraine. We are training Ukrainian men and women in uniform. And that is also an important expression of our support for the rules-based international order, one of the gravest breaches of which has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, and continued aggression in the Donbass. Canada believes very much in the importance of UN peacekeeping missions, and we are sending, beginning this summer, a considerable presence to Mali to participate in the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. We have, as the Prime Minister announced in July, agreed to take on the command role of the UN training mission in Iraq. And I spoke about North Korea. That is another instance where actually deploying hard power is important. Canada was very pleased to be able to support with Canadian airplanes the patrolling of ship-to-ship transfers. So, Canada has sent to take the number 2 role a Canadian officer for the command. So, we believe that it's important on the military side of things to back up the rules-based international with international order with hard power. And, we have to, put our troops where our values are, and we are doing that. So that's part one of the answer. Part two of the answer on trade is, I think I mentioned the WTO intentionally. It is an extremely important organization. I think we have tended in recent years to focus on the negotiating and expanding of the WTO side of things, and focused on issues like, difficult issues like the Doha round. I think that we should not overlook the dispute settlement role that the WTO plays, and that is absolutely essential today more than ever. And we shouldn't overlook the fact that actually it can work. I'm going to mention a very specific case right now, which will only have resonance for Canadians. But at the beginning of July, the WTO ruled in Canada's favor in a dispute over super calendar paper. That's like shiny, glossy paper you see in newspaper supplements. A dispute that we had with the United States. A WTO panel ruled overwhelmingly in our favor. And actually, the United States agreed and lifted the tariffs on Canadian super calendar paper exporters to the United States. And Canadian companies which had faced a tariff are having their money returned. That is an example of the WTO working, of the rules-based international order working. And that's important, and I think we have to work hard to ensure that that mechanism functions. So those, for me, are some examples. And then I think, my third point that I would suggest is, in speaking up for multilateral institutions, for the rules-based international order, I don't want to convey an impression that I think these institutions are perfect as they are. Of course they're not. We are talking about institutions that have their roots in the post-World War II era. The world has changed a lot since then and continues to change. And I think we need to really focus a lot on reforming and updating these institutions so that they are fit for purpose for the realities of the 21st century.
Minister, I'm afraid that we've run out of time, so very sadly we have to bring this 30-second Fullerton lecture to an end, but thank you so much for answering those questions, which covered a very wide range of issues, so frankly and fully. We really appreciate that. And even more so, thank you very much for your really great Fullerton lecture. You dealt with one of the really central issues of 21st century international politics in a very stimulating and inspiring way. So very many thanks for that.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be here. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for the invitation.